Hello there, it's Amanda Fitzgerald, and I am so honoured to be able to interview Terry Waite today because I wanted to really speak to him, or to you, Terry, because I saw you talk last year at a church in Dedham. You gave an incredibly inspiring talk, which I always go back to, and I also have been really enjoying reading your book all about solitude. But I've been reflecting much more on what you told us, because back in, well, it was 1987 when you were a captive, when you were taken captive in Beirut and released 5 years later, and all about solitude and how to manage it best, because you came out and survived, and we're all so in awe of how you managed to achieve that. So I'm so excited to be talking to you, and I want to ask you lots of questions about how you managed your time in captivity, and also to give us some hints and tips on how all of us, the world is in self-isolation, how we can best manage it. So thank you so much for your time today. It's brilliant to be able to speak to you finally. It's funny because I'm beaming in from Colchester and you're also based in Suffolk. So we're both in the east of England, but I can't see you face to face for obvious reasons, for the self-isolation reasons. So thank you very much. So during your time when you were in captivity, you were chained to a radiator in a cell. Was it for how long were you chained to the radiator, Terry?
Well, Amanda, first of all, there'll be a number of people who are watching this who've no idea who I am. I mean, you know who I am. And
I do, of course, yes. I'm one of your big fans.
Just to say, first of all,
yes.
that a number of years ago, a lot of my work was occupied in hostage negotiation. And I began that years ago, first of all with General Amin in Uganda, when my colleagues were imprisoned. Later on with Gaddafi, face to face. Later on with Revolutionary Guards in Iran and in Beirut. But it was in Beirut that I was captured. And you can never do a dangerous job without taking into account the fact that something might go wrong. And it went wrong. And I found myself in an underground cell. Now, one thing, it's a myth that I was chained to a radiator.
Is it?
No, you've exposed a myth, actually, because...
Where have I heard that from, then?
Well, it was popular. Everybody says I was chained to a radiator. Oh. But I wasn't, in fact. I was in an underground cell.
Yeah.
And these were the conditions. Staples were driven into the wall, and I was chained by the hands and the feet to the wall. So it was as good as being chained to a radiator, probably even more restricting. That's what I slept on the floor.
Yeah.
I was in a room with, sometimes if I was in an upper room, a bombed out building, no natural light came in because metal shutters were in front of the window. And I had no books and papers for about 4 years. And when anyone came in the room, I had to pull a blindfold over my eyes so I didn't see anybody.
Wow.
So there was no conversation, no news of the outside world. Often in the dark when the electricity failed or when I didn't have a candle. So it was a situation of really, quite considerable solitude. A bit more. I used to think, you're speaking to me now remotely and I'm in my kitchen. And I used to think to myself, my goodness, wouldn't it be wonderful if I had solitude in a room where I could cook, where I could speak to people as I'm speaking to you, where I could have books. Now I'm in solitude and I've got them all.
Well, exactly. Well, that was what I was going to lead on to say. So, yes, you were in your cell, not fortunately. Well, yes, you told me about how you were, restricted. Your movement was totally restricted. We all have, if we're not homeless, we do have the unfortunate people who are homeless or who are having to sofa surf. I was listening to that today on Women's Hour. There are people who haven't got the freedom, but those of us who do have the freedom to move around from our warm beds to our kitchens, to our balconies or our gardens, if we're lucky to have a garden. So it's really getting some ideas from you how we can best manage that, given that we do actually also have the internet, so we can keep chatting to each other as well. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions to give you, first off, to talk about your captivity, if I may. Okay, is that all right?
I am fine by all means.
Great, thank you very much. So In your time in captivity, what were the qualities that you ended up with, you know, having been totally alone? And if I get my facts right, were you alone? Were you in solitude for 4 years, and then the rest of the time, or there was a certain period at which you were with people, or was it with a guard coming in?
Well, it was almost 5 years I was in solitude. Only for the last few weeks was I with other people. And then I was with John McCarthy, who was a hostage.
Yeah.
Brian Keenan had gone home, so I wasn't with Brian. Terry Anderson, who was also a hostage. So for the last few weeks, I was with them. But for the vast majority of 5 years, I was totally alone. And one of the things you have to do in that situation, I mean, remember when I was first captured and recognized that I was no longer a negotiator but a hostage myself? I remember sitting there on the floor and saying...
Oh, Terry, do you mind taking your hand away from the screen? Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, thank you.
I remember sitting there and saying to myself, 3 things, and I have no idea where these 3 ideas came from. I said, no regrets, no self-pity, and no over-sentimentality.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by no regrets there, I meant, you know, you don't regret what you've done from my point of view, what I've engaged in. Just accept that. Don't feel sorry for yourself, because there are a lot of people in worse situations, and that's the worst thing you can do, is feel sorry for yourself. No over sentimentality. Don't say, oh, if only.
Right.
If only I'd been a better husband, better father. You can't live your life, so you have to get on with it. And somehow that was a help. And the great thing to do in any situation like this is to keep hope alive.
Right.
I mean, today we know, and we can be pretty certain, that this viral problem is going to be solved. We've got some of the best scientists in the world in this.
Yeah.
It's going to be resolved. So keep hope alive. Mm. And I said, I'm going to take this period of imprisonment as an opportunity, not as a disaster. It's an opportunity to explore yourself more fully, to look inwardly more fully, and to get to know yourself better. And that's the attitude. So first of all, it's your mental attitude.
Yeah.
That's what you have to develop.
Okay, well, yes, I think we're all having to do that, and you know, connect with nature and do a hell of a lot more things that we didn't used to do. Okay, so it's the mental. That's brilliant. Those are some really amazing tips. I want to be writing notes. I'm going to come back to this so I can remember to keep hope alive. Don't be regretful. Okay, and during your time in captivity, how did you keep track of your time? Because I assume, wrongly or rightly, that you didn't have a watch. How did you know what time it was or when you're meant to be eating? When I read a bit about that in your book here, about the timing. So can you expand on how you managed to keep track of what day it was, if at all?
Well, it was very, very difficult. You see, unlike most people who are living in isolation at the moment, I was cut off from all external communication. I had my watch was taken away from me, and often I was in the dark, and that was very confusing. So I eventually was able to tell the time when I was moved to some location near to a mosque. And I used to hear the call of prayer at morning, noon, and night.
Yeah.
That gave me a structure for the day. Now, that's another important point, if I may say so.
Yes.
You know, what you've got to do when you are alone is 2 things. First of all, you've got to maintain your pride in yourself, your own dignity. Now, I'll give you an example of that. I was in the army at the end of national service. I was trained in the Grenadier Guards. And I was always trained to keep myself, you know, smart.
Yeah.
Keep a good looking after yourself. In the first week of captivity, I had my own clothes. Only for 1 week. After that, they gave me pajamas and other stuff. And for the first week, I managed to get my trousers off, even though I was chained to the wall.
Wow.
And I put them under the mattress on the floor on which I was sleeping to press them. And my guards thought I was crazy. They thought this fellow's a real loony. In fact, what it was this attempt to say, okay, you've got me, but you're not going to take away the fact that I still have a pride in myself and my appearance as best I can. And so that's very important. And today,
I love that story. I remember you telling us that in the church. I was just envisaging you lying, because you had it was a single, very stingy mattress that you were lying.
It was a very thin mattress. It was pretty hard, I can tell you. And there was a concrete floor, so it wasn't all that great. But the thing is, the temptation today for some people when they're alone is to get up and to slop around all day in a dressing gown or pajamas and not take care. Don't do that. Get up, get dressed properly, and take care of yourself. That's very, very important that you do that. And if you do that, then okay, that's part of the battle.
I totally agree with you, and I'm going to do full confession. I'm in my, it's been lovely to be able to get dressed up for you today, Terry. And I've even put some nice boots on. I've got my leopard print boots on because, it's all very tempting to be slopping around in slippers, but actually, I think getting, we need to have a structure. So my children are working from home, and I'm insisting that they get up out of their pajamas, and, they won't quite go as far as putting on their school uniform, unfortunately.
Well, that's the second thing I was going to, and I'm glad you mentioned that word, because I was just trying to think my second point. And the second point was, look after yourself, and you have to have a structure for the day.
Yeah.
Now, in those years, I had nothing. I had no books, no papers, just sitting there chained up on this mattress on the floor. But I still had to build a structure for the day, because if you don't, you somehow lose yourself. And so, I would wake up in the morning and I would say, right, I'm going to have so much time to think, so much time to write. Now, I had no pencil and paper, but I began to write in my head. Now, before Captivity, I'd never written a book. I'd written papers, I'd written essays and addresses and so on. Never written a book. I never thought I would ever write a book. But I began to write in my head and use my mental powers in a way that I'd never used them before, or to the extent that I'd not used them before. And I discovered I could do that. And I also began to write poetry in my head. Now, looking back, I think one of the reasons for that was this, that when you are alone, there is the tendency to become rather introspective, to look inside. And sometimes to become a bit depressed. Now, when you experience that, or if you experience that, remember that when you look inside yourself, there are always two sides to every individual. Well, some call it the light, the dark, whatever you call it, good or evil, whatever. It's in all of us. Don't be depressed by it. Try and work for that degree of inner harmony and inner calm. And one of the ways I did it was through the use of language, because I believe that good language, like good music, has the capacity to breathe harmony into the soul. And one of the good things about what is happening to us at the moment, we have to look at the positives as well as the negatives. One of the good things that's happening, it can make more and more of us realize that what we need to be is to be in harmony with our environment, harmony with the earth, harmony with each other, harmony within ourselves. And where it gets out of harmony, we get into awful trouble. And I think, the way we've treated the environment, the way we've built on green space, some of the foolish and silly things we've done, are going to rebound on us in a big way. And so somehow, perhaps, this experience might just teach us to be a little more in harmony with people, with your environment, with yourself. Begins with yourself. And that's one of the things I learned from Captivity.
And also, when you're in captivity, you travelled in your mind, didn't you? So you went on lots of travels. So I want to know, A, about that, and B, how, yes, I'm in my house, you can probably see I've been to Africa, I've got those African dolls there, I've been to Peru and all the rest of it. How, so I can probably walk around my room and go, oh, I remember buying that from the market in Cape Town, this, that, and the other. Tell me about your traveling in your mind, and then what we can do traveling within our houses.
Well, I think one of the things is I did that. I mean, I did travel a lot in my mind. But I was trying to keep my mind occupied, you see. And so I went back across places I'd been to and pictured them in my mind. Now, what can we do today in that situation, in the situation that most of us are in now, where we're in isolation, at least older people, where we're in isolation? Well, one of the things we can do is begin to keep a diary. Begin to keep a diary of a day-to-day experience, our thoughts that come to us, and put it down on paper. That's a way of exercising your mind, but also it'll be of great interest in the future.
You know, my mother's doing a diary, 76. She used to do them 10 years ago, and she suddenly brought out her diary, so she's also putting watercolour. So that's great that you approve of what she's doing.
I do, but you see, the thing is, it's an awful fag to do a diary in normal life, but now we have the time. There's no excuse now. Now we've got the time to do it. So one of the things, what I'm doing actually myself, I'm not actually keeping a diary, I'm actually writing a new book. And I just find this really, I mean, obviously, clearly, I find it a tragic situation, and I find it very, very difficult, particularly for people who are very vulnerable, you know, the homeless, the people on the streets and others, particularly. But on the other hand, for me, there are positives in it, because suddenly all my engagements for the rest of the year, everyone has gone, boom, right up the chimney. And now I can say, right, okay, no excuse, get on with the writing and do something creative. You know, in all these situations, it's possible to do something creative.
Yes, well, I was going to say, what is your prediction on how humanity is going to change as a result? Are we going to have a whole load more authors, artists, gardeners? You know, what's your prediction of what will happen, if I may ask you that?
Well, my prediction, I don't know really. I mean, I would hope that suddenly there are a lot of people who suddenly find they had gifts and abilities that they never knew they had. But I'm not over optimistic about massive change. I think so easily people slip back into the normal or the old or routine way of life.
Do you think even after such a long time of all this self-help, do you reckon, you know, because we're going to have to do it for quite a long time, it's not literally like a week. It's going to be much longer than that we're having to be disciplined. So maybe, I'm hoping.
Well, it's going to be a long time. But I think there will be a substantial number of people who suddenly find, you know, perhaps I've not been living my life in the fullest way that has been possible for me. Perhaps they will suddenly discover that they have gifts and abilities they never knew they had. And because they've been in isolation and because they've been forced almost to look at them and draw them out. And that could mean that will be a substantial number of people who find that life has got new dimensions for them and it opens up. But for the whole of humanity, I'm not so sure. There are still a number of people in this world who are who've got their own, particularly just their own interests at heart, and I'm afraid that will always be, because that's human nature.
Yes. Okay. Well, I hope that we can all make our small changes. I mean, actually, interesting for me, I'm going to make a confession. I throw away the kind of the end bit of the bread. It's very naughty of me. You know, the crust and the loaf. I'm now eating it. You know, I think waste is going down. And also today, I would normally throw out. I bought some Pink Lady apples, and they came on a little cardboard carton. I would normally put that straight into recycling. I've now given it to Nina so she can start painting on it. So hopefully we're going to become a bit less wasteful than we have been in the past.
Well, I think there are all these things, all these lessons we can learn, which teach us to appreciate the fact of well, let me go back one bit. I think what an experience like this does, it brings out the best in people and it brings out the worst in people. I mean, I've had telephone calls from people in the village where I am say, look, you've got a problem, ring us up, we'll do the shopping for you, or we'll help you this way and the other. I mean, tremendous love and concern shown. And yet at the same time, we know also that there are some people who are just going to exploit the situation, who are entirely unpleasant, who will steal money from vulnerable people and so on.
Yeah.
But one of the nice things is that it does bring out the best, and I'd like to capitalize on that. One of the things that has really concerned me, though, I'm president of an organization called the Mayors for the Homeless. And I've sent out a letter to all the companions, that's the homeless people.
Yeah.
And only just last night I was talking to one of the communities, you know, where they said, well, we've put ourselves in lockdown, but we are preparing, this is the homeless people in the community.
Yeah.
We are preparing meals, and we're going out in the morning and in the evening with these packed meals and giving them to people who are on the streets who have no home. And that's coming from the homeless themselves in America. And that's great. And that's more and more of our communities are doing that. You know, I started the first community some 30 years ago.
We have one here in Colchester, actually, in Emmaus.
There is one in Colchester, you're quite right. And they're doing a great job. Well, that's marvellous, isn't it? You know?
I know, yes. And I think I was watching the news yesterday, and I think, isn't the army building some places where they can live, where they can stay at this time? So they're not actually.
I think that is also true, that some of the people on the streets. And, you know, you have some of the people on the street, they're a very mixed group of people, but some who really do require specialist care, you know, and I'm afraid, you know, some who have mental problems and so on. It's going to be very difficult. But still, again, people will rally around and do what they can. I only heard yesterday, too, of some nurses from National Health who've been previously in the National Health Service in this country, have gone to Australia, now applying to come back to this country, to come back here, to work here, about 50 of them.
Oh, wow.
And they can't get a flight. Someone said to me, goodness, we should charter a plane to bring them back, you know.
Absolutely.
But that shows you, you know, I mean, one can be just full of admiration for the medical staff and the way they're coping.
Unbelievable. And then, you know, to see that poor woman when she was making that cry for help, for everybody going to the supermarkets and, you know, literally stripping them bare, and she had no food. I mean, that was shocking.
In captivity, you know, one of my fears was that I might become seriously ill. And if I did, there'd be absolutely no medical help whatsoever. I wouldn't get it. I just have to fight my way through it as best I could. Now here, you know, there will some people be afraid of that, and it is a genuine concern and a genuine fear. But I used to say, in the face of my captors, you know, you've taken me, but my soul is not yours to possess. You can't capture me completely. And somehow that goes back to my earlier point. Keep your inner life alive. Now, some people have religious faith, and where does that enter into this whole thing? Well, I've never believed ever that simply because you profess a religious faith, then God is going to come down and say, okay, you're the one who believes, you're going to be okay, and you don't believe that you've had it. I never believed that. I believe we all take our chance. And I don't believe that we get special favors just because you have a belief.
Yeah.
What I do believe is this, that if you have a faith, it enables you to maintain hope. It enables you to have that hope within yourself, and it gives you resources that you can draw on. You know, the ability to stand back, the ability to be reflective, the ability to recognize that you're a part of a much wider creation, the ability to have compassion for other people, the ability to love, the ability to try and understand. Those are the qualities that can come from faith. They're not always. There are many people who don't follow, many people who just become inverted commas, religious. And there's nothing worse than religion in that sense, if you know what I mean. But
Yeah.
true faith
Yes.
will be a faith that's based on compassion and understanding and love. And you can draw on that if you have that. And that's the difference. It's not a case of expecting miracles and expecting suddenly, to be released from the problem. It's an ability to be able to face what comes with compassion and with courage and with understanding.
And did you draw much on your faith when you were in captivity? Did you have a God-given inspiration to you whilst you were in?
I don't think I ever felt, to be honest with you, I never felt the close presence of God. I felt very alone.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean to say you don't have faith. But I mean, I think this again, if you want to talk about faith, that life is a great mystery, really. And people attempt to understand the concept of God and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it means a great mystery. None of us know absolutely. Some people claim to know and they say they tell us, but I really don't believe at the end of the day any of us know completely. What I think one of the purposes in life is to begin to grow more closely to that mystery which lies within each one of us and beyond ourselves, and to grow more closely to that in a variety of ways of doing that, through poetry, through meditation, through compassion, through understanding. And that, to me, is the road to true faith. It's not a matter of attending church or feeling good or clapping your hands. I mean, all those things might be, suit some sort of people. And it happens they don't suit me. We're all different. We're all different.
Absolutely.
But I think there lies true faith in terms of, well, it can be summed up, can't it, in one sentence: love God and your neighbour as yourself.
Absolutely, and that's what a lot of people are doing now during this crisis.
Absolutely.
Something which I've often reflected, again, going back to the Sunday afternoon, when you gave that lovely talk in Dedham Church, you talked about empathy and sympathy, the difference between the two. Can you just retell that story? It's to do with your seeing the homeless people on the floor in the street of London. I think you went to Centre Point. Can you just tell us about that? Because it's really stuck in my mind and actually taught me really well the difference between sympathy and empathy.
Well, the difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy, as I understand it, we can all be sympathetic, and we can sit at a distance and say, yeah, I feel really sorry for X, Y, or Z. And leave it at that. That's sympathy, and it's a good thing to have sympathy. I'm not denying it at all. On the other hand, empathy means you go one step beyond sympathy, because you know what it's like to have nothing. You know what it's like to be kicked around and to be treated as worthless. I know what that's like. I've experienced it. But lots of people have experienced it. Nothing unusual about me, and many other people have experienced it. And if you know what it's like, sometimes then you could be motivated to saying, I'm going to try and do something for those people who have found themselves in that situation of deprivation, of misery, for whatever reason, be it their mental illness, be it their physical illness, be it misfortune in life, whatever. And that's what led me, when I came out of captivity, to say, I'm not going to continue with my salary job. I'm going to earn my own living by writing, by lecturing, and then by giving my time to the homeless, to the prisoner and others. Nothing great about it, just and that's my choice, nothing great about it, but just saying, because I know what it's like to have nothing, I don't want lots of other people to have to experience that and face that. And as far as possible, let's try and do something. And this, again, this experience of being together in all around the world now will hopefully draw out that in some people, not in all, as we're beginning to see through the acts of generosity and kindness that are being shown by people who've got an opportunity to express it.
Wow, yes, we're going to learn so much. And going back to now our own self-isolation. So we're all so used to, you said you had lots of speaking gigs arranged for the whole rest of the year. I'm meant to go into London. Everybody's all got things they've all had to cancel. We all kind of run our day by, 9 till 5 or whatever. How would you recommend people, let's say the over 70s, who, and also many of us now who are now forced to self-isolate anyway, how would you recommend that we kind of structure our day and have something to look forward to? What would you recommend that we do in order to kind of feel fulfilled and like, oh my God, I don't have a deadline, but how maybe potentially we can set ourselves deadlines? I don't know. What would your recommendation be?
Well, I'm 81, so I'm well past it, really.
Still very busy, I tell you.
So I'm still going. I think, first of all, structure the day. For me, to be honest, it's a bit of a relief. I don't have to get up as necessarily as early as I used to do and start off on a journey, because my diary, believe it or not, was absolutely packed for this year, all gone by the board. But it doesn't mean to say I'm going to stay in bed till midday. I get up a little later, to be honest. I get my own on breakfast and so on and so forth. But then I'm lucky, and there are a number of people who'll be able to share with me. You've got the possibility of communicating with others, telephone, iPad, all those ways, and you can develop those relationships. If you're confined to home, you've got a whole world open to you. I speak to friends in New Zealand. I speak to friends all over the world through that, so you can keep in touch with people there. I use my time for writing. A lot of the day is spent sitting here, as I'm sitting now at the kitchen table, writing away and getting on with a book. Well, try something creative, writing a diary or something else. I also, my way of traveling now, I love traveling. I love traveling around the world, but I've discovered on YouTube a wonderful series of little programs by some chap I hadn't heard of before, and I mentioned his name. He's called Jules, and he takes you walks around London, and he's most amusing. And I've lived in London for years, and he's pointed out things in London that I never knew.
Oh.
And now I in the past, would never had enough opportunity to watch those programs. I just wouldn't have had the time. Now I can watch them. And it's made so there's a lot to learn. I've got a whole collection of music, a lot of it I've never listened to it. I've got books galore that I kept saying I'll read one day. That day has arrived.
Exactly. There's no excuse, is there? Yes, I always.
Excuse. Now, how serious were you when you said one day? Because the day has come. The
day of reckoning is.
Take it. Don't let it wait. The thing to remember is this: you don't necessarily live for tomorrow. Live for today. Ooh. Now is life. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, now. So make it as full as possible now, not tomorrow.
I love it. Yes. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to get the paints out now, the minute I finish our interview. Now, this is a question, and it's, I remember in the first kind of few days of hearing all about this coronavirus, I'd wake up at suddenly 2 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, and just feel this awful feeling of not depression, but in deep sadness. And I go, why am I feeling like this? And I thought, oh my God, yes, now I remember why. How do you recommend that we, all of us, deal with sudden waves of despair that they will come? Because if you do happen to turn on the news, you're going to hear about the death toll, not only in this country, but all over the world. You're going to hear about the sad stories of the NHS workers. How do you recommend? Because obviously, you were there for 5 years in your solitary confinement, and you would have dealt with your despair. What's your kind of biggest suggestion on how we can? If it's suddenly coming to us, what would you say? Apart from living in the now, maybe that is the tip. What would you say?
Well, I think everybody is going to feel despair at certain times and feel the threat. I mean, I had actually a physical threat in captivity, many physical threats, because I was tortured, and I remember on one occasion, they evacuated the building because the building I was in was under shell fire,
Wow.
and they chained me up in the bath and left the building, and I was alone in the building, and a shell fell on the building next door.
Wow.
The whole building collapsed. I could hear people shouting and screaming and so on. And I thought, pretty close. So I know what it's like to be vulnerable, put it that way.
Yeah.
And I suppose when you are in despair, you feel vulnerability, you feel, oh dear. Well, if you do feel like that, if you've got some close person close to you who's available on, the media, on iPad or whatever telephone, have a chat with them. Just talk with them. Say, look, I'm really feeling pretty down because of X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
Trouble shared sometimes, the old saying, trouble shared, trouble halved. And we are not at the moment, the vast majority of people are not totally, completely cut off. There'll be one or two, but not very many. So use that. Because after all, we are social animals, for most people, the natural way to live is not to live in total solitariness and total isolation. So I would say when you do feel that, do what I say, get in touch with somebody, talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And I mean, this morning, I got a phone call from a friend of mine. He said, oh, I've just come into the village because I've had to collect something. He said, I'm outside your house. So we stood 12 feet apart and had a very good conversation, and had a very nice chat. That's possible, in certain circumstances, So I think the thing is, share it, share your happiness as well as sharing
that's great.
your despair.
Both, yes, fabulous. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I want to now finish off by talking about your book that you showed us, which I think you wrote in 2017, but never has it been more really relevant for, I think, everybody to read it and to get to know people who actually have chosen solitude as a way of life. For example, that I would call them the happy couple who lived in the most remote part in Australia, and then also all through to the captives of, what you call them, prisoners of war from the Japanese, who were in Japanese kept prisoners of war camps, and they were forced in a certain form of solitude. They weren't allowed, they were ordered by their officers that just get on with life, do not tell anybody about your experiences. And then there's another, Joseph Stalin's daughter, who was kind of in a forced captivity because of, all the stuff that her father did. And so she was constantly on the hoof, running away from it. So some people choose it, some people don't. So your book, can you just give us a bit of an insight into your book? Because I think people need to be clicking and buying and really enjoying, because also you share a lot of your story in captivity throughout this book as well. And I've really enjoyed it.
Well,
and you signed it, Terry. I'm sorry, I'm going to show the proof that we did actually meet. There you go.
Oh, I did.
Thank you.
Well, I wrote that book, Solitude, and it does look at solitude from different perspectives. I went out to Australia and went to some of the most remote places you could find. Rabbit Flat, where this couple had lived for years, 400 miles from the nearest shop.
Wow.
It's then if you forget the milk, it's a long way to go back.
There's a big row going to happen.
But then, and also to, one of the remote ranches, huge ranch in Australia, where the wife of the rancher had never been into town for 10 years. And she said, I love it here because I feel at one with with the environment, at one with the earth. I'm so happy in this lovely, peaceful surrounding. And then I went to see somebody in Chicago, when I was in Chicago, a chap who lived in a little apartment surrounded by thousands of people and completely alone. And what that tells you really is partly your attitude, your mental attitude. if you've got the right mental attitude, you can be totally devoid of other people and be content and happy in your environment. And the same is true.
Yeah.
One can only hope that life in cities these days is, for instance, how many people do know their neighbours. But this experience might, in fact, begin to change that for some people, where people begin to say, you know, we are responsible for each other. We're not just a solitary, isolated unit.
Yes.
And I also, you know, visited, some people have solitude thrust upon them. Stalin's daughter, Svetlana, came to stay with us in London many years ago when she left the Soviet Union and was trying to settle in the United Kingdom. And one time she said to me, it was Christmas, she said, I'd love to go to church. I said, right, I'll take you to the Orthodox Church in Princess Gate in London. And she thought for a moment. She said, I can't go. So I said, why not? She said, well, she said, my father was responsible for the exile of most of those people there. They'll know me and they reject me. And, you know, she'd had a certain form of solitude forced upon her by circumstances. Well, entirely different in this experience now. But many people have had solitude now forced upon them by circumstances that are not their fault at all, nothing to do with them. And somehow don't take it in the way of saying, right, this is the end. It isn't the end. It's the beginning of a new experience. It's the beginning of a new opportunity. And somehow, one of the, I think I finished the book, I can't remember now, but I think I finished the book by meeting with the matron of, a former matron of a hospice, who'd seen hundreds of people, accompanied them on their final journey out of this life. And she was the most remarkable person, because at the end of the day, you know, we may be alone at this time, we may be isolated at this time, and when it comes to the point of death, that is the one journey we do take alone. And we're all going to face it. We're all going to be there. Nothing to be afraid of. It's just a natural process. And she was saying how, you know, by showing just compassion, care, and understanding, people had gone from this life in a positive way. And all I would say in conclusion, you know, from this experience through which we're going, it's a tragedy, it's a disaster for many people, financial and otherwise. But it's not the end. It's not the end, because take it positively and something creative can and will emerge for all of us.
And we're great at adapting, aren't we, us humans?
Great.
Yes. Terry, I would like to say thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute honour, really amazing honour and privilege to speak with you. So thank you so much for sharing all your insights and your wisdom. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Nice to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.